So thrilled to have Dr. Sara Gottfried with us, who is the director of the Precision Medicine Program at the Marcus Institute, part of our Department of Integrative Medicine and Nutritional Sciences. And she's also a 4-time New York Times bestselling author in the integrative health space and a featured speaker at our conference this week. So Dr. Gottfried, tell us a little bit about your talk.
So the talk is on emerging nutrients for autoimmune disease. And I think what's so interesting about autoimmune disease is that it's a population that is woefully underserved. And yet there are so many things we now know about the transition from being healthy to pre-autoimmune disease to autoimmune disease. And I feel like we're especially set up in the Department of Integrative Medicine and Nutritional Sciences and the Marcus Institute to be able to serve these folks.
Is this a big problem, autoimmune disease?
It's a huge problem. It affects 25 million people, but that's really the tip of the iceberg because so many more people struggle with symptoms that can go on for 4.5 to 7 years before they receive an accurate diagnosis. And on average, they see 4 to 6 physicians. So it just feels like this is a group of people, and I would put myself in that pre-autoimmune category. It's a group of people that we fail them. The conventional medical system fails them. So the talk was about understanding some of the underpinnings. One of the slides that I had was something I learned from Alessio Fasano, who is a pediatric gastroenterologist at Massachusetts General Hospital. And he described how you need a 3-legged stool to develop autoimmune disease. You need to have a genetic predisposition. You need to have increased intestinal permeability, also known as leaky gut. And then you need a trigger. And so that trigger sometimes is trauma. That's what I've seen in my patients at the Marcus Institute. It could be also an infection like COVID or food poisoning, a bacterial infection. So there's lots of different triggers, but that link between trauma and autoimmunity, I think, is especially interesting.
That's huge. What are some of the symptoms that people commonly experience who are going through this journey and don't know that this is an emerging autoimmune disease?
Well, the symptoms can be really nonspecific and somewhat vague. And so it can be waxing, waning joint pain, muscle pain. It could be that you just feel tired, you feel fatigued. And frankly, I think that affects so many of us today that it can fly below the radar and people don't realize that they've got this disease brewing. It can include having skin rashes. It can include skin disruptions like psoriasis. It can include weakness, such as with multiple sclerosis. So the most common autoimmune diseases are things like rheumatoid arthritis. So again, you've got the joint issues there and fatigue. It can include type 1 diabetes. In fact, I've got a patient that I described in the lecture that we could get into today.
I'd love to hear more about this recent patient that you saw.
Yeah, so I saw a patient a couple of years ago at the Marcus Institute, 52-year-old woman who came in with new onset type 1 diabetes. And a lot of folks think of type 1 diabetes as an onset in childhood or adolescence. But what I see very commonly is that it affects women that are in the transition of perimenopause or menopause. And that was certainly the case in this woman. One thing that was interesting about her, and I don't know if this was causal or just contributed to her trigger, but she's someone who had a green drink every single day. So a really healthy antioxidant, polyphenol-rich green drink. She'd have it every morning, and then she would exercise. And then during the pandemic, she ran out of this green drink, and she wasn't able to get it. And the onset of her symptoms began within about a month or two, and then she had this diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. And then she had the conventional approach, which is pretty well proven. She got started on metformin to try to extend the honeymoon period with her pancreas and her beta cells to keep them functioning as long as possible. But what we found as we started to work together, and I did her genetics, and I found that she had this predisposition, and I did her biomarker testing, we found that she had a number of micronutrient deficiencies, and we started a continuous glucose monitor for her. What I found was that the metformin that she was treated with was making her glucose better overall, but she would have these really low dips after she took her medicine, and she was taking it 3 times a day. So she would feel more tired, sometimes a little shaky and hypoglycemic when she had these episodes as a result of the metformin. But the metformin was not serving her. It was not providing the homeostasis that she really needed. And so we had a food-first approach with her. So we started her on a cardiometabolic food plan, which we put a lot of our Marcus patients on, Marcus Institute patients. And that was incredibly helpful for her. And then we layered on, once her food was in place, a number of immunomodulators. So vitamin D is a key one, DHEA, sulforaphane, which we can talk about. She was taking a lot of broccoli sprouts. And then we also used low-dose naltrexone. And that really made a difference inside of about 6 weeks of treatment. Her glucoses were much better. She went from kind of this roller coaster with her glucoses to more of a flat line. And that's what we want. We want less spikiness with glucose because it triggers so much inflammation in the body to have that roller coaster of glucose.
So now that she's established that homeostasis, what does that mean for this diagnosis of type 1 diabetes?
I wouldn't say that she's in remission yet because she still has really high GAD antibodies, which is one of the types of type 1 diabetes. But I would say that she's on the path toward remission. So one of the things we try to do in precision medicine, really all of medicine, is to take people from that disease state, in this case type 1 diabetes, autoimmune disease, and try to revert them to more of a pre-autoimmune state. And I would say she's in that direction. We need to have better biomarker testing to be able to document this for her. But maybe more important is that she feels so much better. She's got so much more energy. She's sleeping better through the night. We also started her on bioidentical hormone therapy, something that we do a lot of at the Marcus Institute. And those are immunomodulators too. They really help the immune system. So that estrogen, bioidentical progesterone, all of that is coming together to create congruence for her so that she feels a lot better.
So it's really bringing a lot of tools that just aren't available in the typical conventional model.
Well, I think in the conventional model, I mean, you and I are embedded in the conventional model. I don't like to blame or to say that there's any shortcomings. I just think that when you offer integrative medicine or functional medicine or precision medicine, when you are able to personalize and you're able to bring all these different ways of addressing something like autoimmune disease and not just go for the biologics and, the very expensive pharmaceuticals, but instead think of this bigger ecosystem of the food the person is eating, the triggers that they might be exposed to, and really adjusting the environment so it's more conducive to heading in that direction away from disease, toward pre-disease and maybe even a state of health. That's really what serves our patients.
In a way, it's adding value to that important medical treatment plan her endocrinologist started.
It's potentially transforming someone's life because this woman feels like she's got her life back. When she first was diagnosed by the endocrinologist with type 1 diabetes, she just felt like, oh my God, like this is just, I'm just going to be, heading toward cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, high blood pressure. She just kind of could see this whole landscape that she didn't want. And our conventional colleagues aren't always taught to think outside of the box and to think about, okay, what are they eating? How are they exercising? What about purpose and meaning? What kind of connections do they have in their life? What are some of the potential immunomodulators that are well proven with a scientific basis, many of which we study at the Marcus Institute? How could those help this patient? Maybe as an alternative to biologics or adding value to the biologics and potentially getting them off the biologics.
I look forward to reading your next book that's coming out in 2024, where the trauma component that you mentioned earlier is really gone into in great depth. So is there one thing you would want people to know before they can read the book, if they're having some of the symptoms that you've talked about of autoimmunity or pre-autoimmune disease that would be helpful for them to know about?
Well, it's hard for me to pick just one thing. So maybe if I could do, first
a couple of things. All right.
So number one, I would say consider an elimination diet. So it's well proven in a number of different autoimmune diseases to really improve symptoms dramatically, such as rheumatoid arthritis. And that was studied decades ago, and yet it's still not used that commonly in conventional medicine. And then number two, when you think about the potential triggers of autoimmune disease, I always think of trauma first and foremost. And so I would encourage our viewers and listeners to take the ACE questionnaire and just see what were your adverse childhood experiences. The ACE questionnaire is one of the most validated questionnaires that we have looking at trauma. And then third, one of the things that I think has been so important in the work that you've done at the Marcus Institute and in the department is studying the neuroemotional technique. And I just think it's such a profound way to be working with trauma.
So what was that moment in life for you where you realized you wanted to heal people and you wanted to do it in this way that you're doing it now?
That moment was when I was in a graduate program in bioengineering. So I was getting a PhD in bioengineering, and my grandmother was struggling with Alzheimer's disease. It was so devastating because I'd always been really close to her. She's the person who picked me up from school every day when I was a kid. I had just witnessed her personality disappearing as she progressed with her Alzheimer's disease. And that was tragic. Equally tragic was that her doctors diagnosed her with Alzheimer's and then just said, get your affairs in order. So she ended up languishing in a nursing home for 18 years. I would go visit her as often as I could. She lived in Texas. And I just felt like, okay, I want to go into engineering, but it sure seems like there are some problems to solve in medicine that are not being addressed the way that they could be. And so that got me to turn right. I decided to apply to medical school. I felt like I'm pretty social. I'm pretty extroverted. I love to be with people and I love to solve problems with other people. And it felt like medicine was maybe a better fit for me than engineering. But it was that experience with my grandmother and really what felt like almost bankruptcy with the neurologist that she saw that got me to say, okay, I want to do medicine, but I want to do it differently. I want to do it with the mindset of a systems thinker and an engineer. And I found that most of the fields of medicine didn't have that, but integrative medicine did. And I saw that from the beginning. I worked with David Eisenberg when I was at Harvard Medical School, Ted Kapchuk, and I just saw that there was a level of integration that I could pursue during my career that offered patients, again, this ecosystem that is much broader and much more able to heal and transform. It creates healing states of consciousness. And that was really the moment that got me here.
So it sounds like your engineering background really led you to think in this systems-based way that integrative medicine also approaches problems.
There's a few different threads to it. So engineering certainly gets me to think about modules, and it gets me to think in a broader, more inclusive way about how to solve a problem. Whereas what exists in conventional medicine, the system that you and I trained in, is more of a silo-based approach to care. So if you have a gut problem, you go to the gastroenterologist. If you've got a brain problem, you see the neurologist. If you've got a problem with your uterus, you see the OBGYN. Whereas in integrative medicine, we're thinking about the whole person. You know, when you consider the gut, when you consider the complexity of the microbiome, when you think about what can go wrong with imbalances with the gut microbes, and you think about how the gut manages your hormone levels, as an example, as well as how much you extract from the food that you eat, nutrients, calories, et cetera, energy. In integrative medicine, we're thinking in a de-siloized way. We're really thinking about the entire whole person who's in front of us. We're looking, in my case, in precision medicine and what I do. At the Marcus Institute, I'm thinking of the genomics and how those drive particular problems with biomarkers. We're measuring biomarkers. We do a lot of dense testing. And we're using that to really achieve whatever goals the patient or client has. So I work in executive health, so a lot of it is about career longevity. It's about staying cognitively sharp as long as possible, helping people who maybe have gotten into some patterns with toxic stress and with maybe drinking too much and traveling too much. So we we think in a de-siloized way about that. The other thing another thread that I think is important besides the systems thinking is that I started practicing yoga when I was 5 years old. And I did that with my great-grandmother who lived until 97. And she really taught me that the way to health is with the way that you eat, move, think, connect, love. It's not about finding health in a pill bottle. And so I think it's those things together, woven together, that really got me to where I am.
What are some of the cases you've had that have inspired you when the going gets tough?
The first thing that comes to mind is that I'm so privileged to take care of the Philadelphia 76ers. And these guys are some of the most spiritually enlightened beings I've ever worked with. They've got physical majesty. They won the genetic lottery. And they're under a lot of stress. Many of them are age 21, 22, up to 36, 37. And they have a lot of pressure on them to perform at their highest capacity every single game, often back-to-back games, night after night. And they also lift up their community. They really take that very seriously. So I am inspired by the service that my 76er players provide to their community and to, the larger community of people who are so inspired by sports and just love to get engaged in rivalry, especially the Philadelphia fans. And then there's also just, kind of the regular folks that I take care of, whether that's executives that want to keep serving as long as possible. And I feel like that's something we really help them do in the executive program at the Marcus Institute. And I had a woman last week who was so inspiring to me. She was in her early 60s, and she'd always been told that she was a picture of health. And she came to us and we diagnosed a couple of really important things. We found that her stress level as measured by her cortisol was about 3 times what it should be. 3 times. And that's not good. High cortisol does a lot of bad things in the body. It's a wear and tear hormone.
Sure.
It can shrink the brain in your 40s. That was proven in a study in neurology in 2018. It can increase belly fat. It can hasten cognitive decline. And so we found a lot of other things with her, but that cortisol level and the way that she kind of understood it and now is starting to change her life around it, kind of re-architect her life, that inspires me so much. And inspires me in part because I was that person with the cortisol that was 3 times what it should have been when I was in my 30s. And I turned that ship around. And I just want to, shout it from the rooftops that this is possible for all of us.
For those of us who'd like to pre-order your book, what's the title?
The title is The Autoimmune Cure. You can get it wherever books are sold. And I would so appreciate your support.
Great. I look forward to reading it.
Thank you.